Hi, thanks for joining us. We'll be beginning the presentation in just a minute or two. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. Hi, if you're just joining us, we're going to be starting in just about 1 minute. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. Thanks. All right, hello and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Miro Consulting webinar on Microsoft announces the cancellation of support and services. My name is Sean Donahue and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Miro Consulting. Joining me today is Miro's Director of Technical Services, Tim Hegedus. If you have any questions during the broadcast, please use the question box in your webinar control panel, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Please note that if you'd like to ask a question, we won't say who's asking it, but we will read the question out to the audience and try to answer it the best we can in the time we have. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly explain who Miro is. Miro Consulting is a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, and Salesforce. We specialize in license management, audit advisory, negotiation tactics, support management, and cloud services. Our mission is to help our clients maximize ROI on their software license and subscription investments, stay in compliance, and negotiate successful contracts and audit settlements. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Tim to begin the presentation. Tim?
Thank you very much, Sean, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. As you know, I am Tim Hegedus, and I'm here to present some new information regarding some recent Microsoft announcements. Now, in a growing trend, Microsoft has made something of a flurry of announcements over these recent weeks. Today, we're going to discuss them in terms of how they can affect your organization and probably more importantly, how they affect your organization's wallet. Now, these announcements will include the Azure Dedicated Host Service, right? Dedicated hosts in the listed providers, and we'll add some details about that. And the updated hybrid use benefit for Azure, all of which are interrelated. We will also discuss some changes Microsoft is making to its software assurance benefits, including its new support push. You can also consider those to be interrelated as well. Now, on August 1st of this year, Microsoft announced a preview of its Azure Dedicated Host Service. Both AWS and Google, for example, has had this service available to its customers for quite some time. Now, this is not a bare metal service. It's designed to run Azure virtual instances or VMs, if you choose. These dedicated hosts will still incur automatic maintenance, though when that occurs, can be determined by the customer to help avoid some services interruptions. Now, while there is a default option that will automatically replace a host that fails, right? Microsoft does nevertheless recommend that multiple hosts with multiple virtual instances be deployed. This is important to know because optionally, these hosts can be deployed in different geographies, or what Microsoft refers to them as availability zones, to support high availability. So the idea is that even if you think you have a backup or a DR situation, because you're in the Azure dedicated host service, you really don't. It's really just for catastrophic hardware failures, and that is something that's going to be handled by Microsoft. Now, there are, as of today, just two options available. They're both on the Xeon platform, and it costs just above $4 an hour, about $4 an hour. That's U.S. pricing, and obviously that number depends on configurations. Both options offer both the Windows and the Linux operating systems as a platform. Now, this offering targets the organizations that require specific segregation, which are quite often based on security mandates. And that's pretty obvious, right? That's who would be in the market for this particular service. But less obvious is Microsoft's targeting of organizations who are contemplating cloud deployments and those who have cloud deployments at competing providers. They do this through some special pricing, which we'll get into later. Now, the current, and I'm emphasizing current companies in Microsoft's listed providers group includes itself, Alibaba, AWS, and Google, as well as their solutions. So one of the things that you might do is think of the VMware cloud and on AWS as an example. These providers are not currently on the list, or I'm sorry, those providers that are not currently on the list are not affected by this change yet. Right? Miro believes that Microsoft often floats an idea or policy change to gauge the reaction of its customer base. Then that policy either matures or is adjusted based on that reaction. In other words, the backlash of the customers. Unified support, which we'll also discuss later, is one such policy change. Now, per Microsoft, this change levels the field. I'm doing air quotes here, as it deems cloud deployments, again, this is Microsoft speak, it deems cloud deployments on dedicated hosts as being more akin to cloud-based multi-tenant deployments than to on-premise deployments. We'll move on. Enough said about that particular aspect. The new policy, which, by the way, came into effect in the beginning of this month, and so is in effect as we speak, affects virtually all products that can be deployed in the cloud. It does not, however, affect current deployments, existing ones. Here's some details. On the server side, both the Exchange Server and SharePoint Server products must have license mobility, which is afforded through software assurance. With or without software assurance, Windows Server is now disallowed, except on the Microsoft Azure platform through the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. Remember that this doesn't affect existing deployments, right? Also, and this is important, Windows Server from a service provider through its service provider license agreement, or the SPLA, is doable, but BYOL, or bring your own license, is no longer permitted. Now, again, this all affects dedicated hosts, all right? So it's what we envision to be a smaller subset of the users of the cloud environment. SQL Server, like Exchange Server and SharePoint Server, will require license mobility through active software assurance. It can also be part of the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, which, by the way, also requires active software assurance. Or you can license SQL Server through the SPLA as offered by the provider. Now, the reason that I mentioned Exchange Server and SharePoint Server first in this list is because the very important fact that pertains to the latter two, and I want to say this very, very clearly, No longer will unlimited virtualization be attached to Windows Server Data Center or to SQL Server Enterprise in the per core license metric, except through the hybrid use benefit. That is very, very key, and I can't emphasize it enough. On the client side, only Windows Virtual Desktop Access or VDA plans E3 and E5 are permitted. Now, unless you view Microsoft as somewhat evil, recognize that they're throwing you a bone. That is, and I quote, customers will have until October 1st of 2020 to move their existing Windows Enterprise workloads off listed providers' dedicated host cloud services. Okay, so you have a little less than a year. But Office Professional Plus, that does not enjoy that magnanimity. Its deployment in the cloud will not be allowed with or without software assurance. Now, I mentioned that the existing deployments are not affected by this policy change, but you are somewhat stuck in that mode, right? You see, neither upgrades nor new workloads are permitted for those existing licenses. And that extends to, in other words, this new policy envelops both homegrown and third-party applications. Now let's talk price. Okay, how does this affect your organization? Well, first, it could affect budgeting because software assurance has to be factored in. That's a 25% annual surcharge for server software like Windows Server. Now, if there is no active insurance in place, then upgrading the software, being mindful of the support window, would be not as much of a hit without active software assurance on these licenses, but those deployments could not have been upgraded in any event. So if you were to acquire new licenses to replace these old licenses and deploy them in the cloud, that would require software assurance. So there could be some hit, potentially. However, Microsoft is making it easier to afford such cloud deployments by deploying in Azure and making use of the hybrid use benefit, along with reservations, right? That's reserved instances, and extended security updates where they're applicable. That is for Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2. But be aware that software assurance cannot be applied retroactively. That is, that software assurance had to have been attached to the product when it was originally purchased. Meanwhile, the hybrid use benefit allows for retroactive tagging. That's a quote from Microsoft on existing VMs on Azure. Now, I would like to pause here just a moment to discuss why the Amazons or Googles of the world would not like this. Immediately, this new announcement could prohibit customers from implementing or upgrading to new versions of the software, something called breaking free, right? Some organizations still require the older versions of Windows Server or SQL Server in order to run their business, and they want to have or need to have the security of a dedicated host. So from that standpoint, these organizations in all likelihood will not move. However, being mindful of the support lifecycle, some of these deployments would necessarily require some sort of an upgrade. And since legacy systems are often excluded from software assurance, a new purchase would be necessary. And if the deployment will be on a dedicated host, well, then software assurance is required. It could also be something that would prevent organizations from turning to another provider. That is, unless the organization needs to upgrade and is willing to and able to shell out the additional fees, like that 25% per license, then the discounted fee associated with the hybrid use benefit, which we'll get into in a moment, might not mitigate that cost, right? So that may be reason enough to defer or delay such an upgrade. So let's talk about the hybrid use benefit, and we'll explore it in a little bit more detail. Now, Microsoft has stated that the lowest total cost of ownership comes from the coupling of Azure hybrid use benefit with the reserved instances and the extended security updates, which are commonly referred to as ESUs. Of course, that means that these points actually apply to your organization. For example, if your organization, like most organizations, is cyclical in nature, that is, has a very busy seasons interspersed with slower ones, then reserve instances might not be cost effective. That can grow even worse if you quote unquote guess wrong, because while and I'm quoting again, this time directly from the Microsoft site on reserved instances, while Azure reserved VM instances often offer prioritized capacity, they don't guarantee that that capacity will be available for your VM. And then you would have to exchange your purchase for another Azure reserved VM instance, unquote. So now Microsoft does offer instance size flexibility that can allow you to change the size of a VM within your region and have the same pricing benefit apply, right? That doesn't mean that the actual size of the data, the VM differs, but that the pricing associated with it differs. So it doesn't necessarily undo the need to purchase another instance, perhaps outside of that regional VM. Now, the bottom line on ESUs, whenever there is active software assurance or subscription licenses, the organization can purchase extended security updates for 75% of the full license costs, right? That's an annual price. So that, I'm sorry for that brief interruption. So that's 75% of the full license cost annually on those servers that are covered. But that cost is eliminated when you transition that workload, those licenses, to Azure. Now, here we take a look at some of the discounts comparing the use of Azure against other providers. Remember that your organization can achieve a lowest cost by combining the Azure hybrid use benefit with the reservation pricing or reserved instances, plus the extended support, which is the extended security updates. As always, your actual costs could vary. Right? Next, we look into the changes from the Microsoft announced relative to software assurance. And to be honest, this is a little pause in the presentation to allow me to refresh myself. Okay. So, beginning in February of 2020, that's just a few months away, the deployment planning services benefit in software assurance is being retired and replaced with the Microsoft Fast Track. The Microsoft Fast Track is what Microsoft refers to as its single primary approach toward planning services. It can be used for Azure, for Microsoft 365, and Dynamics 365 engagements. Right? These and other cloud services will be removed from that deployment planning services benefit effective February of next year. With that said, deployment planning services will be available for you until January of 2022. That includes in-depth planning assistance and consultant services, helping to plan both on-premise and hybrid deployments, right? The caveat here is that it all uses the very latest technology as the foundation for that planning. Now, Miro is seeing a trend whereby the implementation of new technologies can really be beyond beyond the knowledge base of traditional organizations. So it's important to view Fast Track, the Microsoft product or the Microsoft offering, as more than just a one-time environment or a one-time thing. The training voucher benefit for software assurance is also being deprecated beginning in February of 2020. Right? At the same time, training days can no longer be converted to planning services. However, and this could be important to you, training vouchers can still be used through January 2022, excluding Azure training, which will no longer be available effective February of next year. Now, most of you know what training vouchers are for, but in case you didn't, how to describe them. They are intended to provide technical training for IT professionals and developers. They would help these experts deploy, manage, and support new software and new technologies. And their benefit as part of software assurance is that they are largely free, provided you spend sufficient amount for software assurance. Now, in Miro's experience, those training vouchers aren't fully used, so that again points to Microsoft's habit of kind of read and react when it announces its policy changes. Now, this is an important part of our discussion here today. In order to wean people off of Premier support with its directed consumption to a more broadly based program, Microsoft is offering unified support. But hear me out on this. This isn't necessarily new news because unified support has really been around for some time, but it hasn't been broadly adopted. And while some of that is attributed to the unnecessary coverage of products, most of it, in Miro's experience, appears to be due to its expense. So Microsoft is making some overtures in this area. First, it is offering basic problem resolution support, or what some of you know as PRS, based on a $250,000 spend on software assurance. That's $250,000. In Miro's experience, that's a considerable hurdle because a $250,000 software assurance spend equals about over 162 core packs of Windows Server Data Center. And that's at the no-level pricing. At the cost of an EA, the entry-level EA, it's well over 200 two-core packs of Windows Server Data Center. And that's Data Center, and that's more expensive. So getting to that is something of a feat. Okay, if you find yourself in that category, congratulations, I guess. But the idea is that you will be receiving some basic PRS for that amount of spend. they're also offering a credit towards unified support. But we have to question, what is that credit? And as of this writing, there is little to no information about how that credit would be calculated or how it would be applied. So we invite you to stay tuned for that. Now, here we see a synopsis of what I just explained. Some of the changes for software assurance there. The last two are effective on the first day of the month listed, right? But again, planning a training day and redeeming that voucher are two different things. So while some cognizance is important, you still have some time, a little bit less time, of course, if you're renewing your enterprise agreement, for example, in 2021 versus right now. Now, unified support versus premier support and their comparison. Unified support has offerings within three different types of plans, right? And each are priced differently. There's the core subscription, which is 6% of the systems pool, which includes Office 365, and 8% for the server pool, which would include CALs. That's the core. The advanced raises those price points by 2%. In other words, 8% for applications and systems and 10% for server. And then the performance, the high level, the high end offering raises it again by 2 percentage points, or 10% and 12% respectively. Now, each entails a prescribed set of proactive support, as well as high-level technical support and response times. But there is currently no mixing and matching between the various levels, but Miro feels that could just become a negotiation strategy. Now, whereas Premier support involved an assessment that was more or less tailored to your specific needs, Unified support is priced by referencing the spend on the licenses over the last 5 years, combined with the sum of online services from the prior year. Right? This then results in the cost of the 1-year contract. 1-year contract. Now, this does not, of course, factor in the credit, which we know very little about. But this change, we believe, is an attempt by Microsoft not only to generate revenue, but also to something less than forcibly, and please notice the air quotes, cause its customers to adopt this new support model. Now, for more information, we invite you to read through the Miro blog on the unified support. If you'd like a link to that blog, please enter it in the question box, or simply contact us. And you see how you can contact us right there. If you have any questions, now's the time to answer them. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean Donahue.
Thanks, Tim. We're a little over the time session, so for those of you who asked questions, we're going to get back to you individually after the event to follow up and get you those answers. And if you wanted to ask a question and didn't have a chance to send it in yet, please email us at info@miroconsulting.com. You can also call us at 732-738-8511, extension 1208. So if you have any further questions about this, or want to figure out how to estimate where you are and what kind of support you're going to get for your upcoming Microsoft contracts, again, please give us a call. That concludes the broadcast. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.